Carbs that improve insulin sensitivity. It sounds kind of counterintuitive. How could adding more blood sugar actually help insulin sensitivity? Well, you have to look at how these particular foods, and I've got 5 of them, actually affect our metabolism. There's more to it than just breaking down carbs and starches into glucose. There's polyphenols, there's antioxidants, there's fiber. All these things can contribute to a better outcome. So let's dive in. Before we get to these 5 carbs, what I would recommend you do before you have any kind of carbohydrates is get some protein in, whether it's a protein shake or a good quality source of protein in regular food form. I popped the link down below for SunWarrior's active protein line. So if you're someone that is trying to get more protein in, but you want to do so in a well-balanced way, their active line is tremendous. So they're leaning into pumpkin seed protein as their plant-based source of protein. I find this really fascinating because not only is it rich in other minerals, but it is a very good source of protein, especially when it's combined with some of the other proteins that they add in it. So I'm not a plant-based guy, but I rotate my protein powders. I use whey isolate, but I also use plant-based protein powders all the time because I want different benefits. The cool thing about their active line is it also has probiotics and enzymes in it to help out with the digestion as well. So that link down below will save you 20% off whatever you want to get from them, whether it's their active protein, whether it's their hydration, whether it's going to be some of their meal replacement. The world is your oyster. They have all kinds of different products, but in this particular case, if you're gonna have carbs, it just makes sense to have some protein first. So that link is down below in the description. The first carb that increases insulin sensitivity is raspberries. And I know you're probably thinking, okay, yeah, it's just the fiber content of raspberries. Because yeah, they're pretty high in fiber, but that's not the real reason. In fact, if you look at a study that was published in Nutrition and Diabetes, they had rats eat a very high fat, high calorie diet to basically make them very metabolically deranged. They messed these rats up by making them unhealthy. Then they added raspberries into the mix. The group that had raspberries in the mix ended up having improvements in insulin resistance. They had better insulin sensitivity, they had lower levels of glucose, and they were metabolically just better off, in spite of having all this metabolic damage inflicted upon them. Now they also noticed that these rats had much less inflammation. So what was happening here? It can't just be the fiber. I mean, you can have fiber and get all kinds of benefits, but it's not going to do that. Well, raspberries are unique. They have antioxidants that can help modulate inflammation. They have polyphenols that can impact glycemic control, so they can impact how the glycemic response is of a given food. They, of course, have the fiber, but then they have tannins. And I've talked about in many videos, these tannins inhibit the amylase enzyme. This is the enzyme that starts to break down carbohydrates. So essentially, if you eat raspberries with higher carb meals, it reduces how quickly you can digest those carbs, giving your pancreas a bit of a break and thereby improving insulin sensitivity. The next one is buckwheat. Now, buckwheat is super interesting because it's a flour in a sense, but it's not a grain. So it's totally gluten-free, and it is a very interesting starch that's technically kind of a seed flour. It's not even really a grain. But because it can be used as a flour, you can bake with it, you can make desserts with it. There's 10 grams of fiber in it and 13 grams of protein in a 100 gram serving. But that's not just it. It's also partially resistant starch. Now with resistant starch, you have tremendous effects, okay? Resistant starch are resistant to digestion in our gut. So what that means is that our gut bacteria has to ferment it and break it down. Why is this good? Because it gives our gut an opportunity to produce more short chain fatty acids, more butyrate, okay? So you create more bacteria that can produce butyrate. What is interesting about butyrate? Butyrate operates as a signaling device, and it helps us metabolize glucose better. So at a very fundamental level, when we have more butyrate as a result of more of this resistant starch, it communicates with the cells to help them use glucose better. But additionally, it helps increase secretion of GLP-1. Have you heard of semaglutide or Ozempic? It's being talked about a lot right now. They're called GLP-1 receptor agonists. Essentially, they create a spike in GLP, in glucagon-like peptide. Well, buckwheat, because of the resistant starch and the downstream sort of butyrate effect, you can have this increase in GLP-1 that makes you more satiated, but also allows the pancreas to produce insulin more effectively, thereby modulating insulin, modulating glucose, and improving insulin sensitivity. This next one is one that kind of falls into an interesting category, and that's going to be oats. There's a very important thing you have to remember with oats. When you take oats, it is a starch chain, and that starch chain, when you heat it, expands into individual glucose molecules, so that makes it very high glycemic, even if there's soluble fiber in oatmeal. That doesn't make oatmeal a healthy snack. So it is a very important piece. And if you have instant oatmeal, there is even some data that describes that instant oatmeal, whether there's sugar added in it or not, because of how it's pulverized and it's processed into like a finer meal ahead of time, the spike of glucose is even higher with instant oatmeal, even if it's unflavored. So what you want to do is you want to get either steel cut oats or you want to get whole oats that are gluten-free. You want to cook them and then you cool them in the refrigerator. Now, the cool thing is, once you cool them, they become a retrograded resistant starch, just like the buckwheat. If you reheat them after they have been cooled, you do retain some of the retrograded starch benefit. Some of the starches expand again, and it does get a little higher glycemic, but when I'm wearing a continuous glucose monitor, I can see it very clearly. Cooled oats have a minimal impact on my glucose. Cooled oats that have been reheated again, even in a microwave, still have a minimal impact, just slightly above cooled oats. So if you're trying to get more of this beta-glucan beneficial fiber and overall insulin sensitivity effect, you have to eat them cold or put them into a smoothie once it's been cold. You just do not want to have the straight raw oats, or you do not want to eat it too hot, and definitely don't add the sugar to it. This next one's a little bit sneaky, okay, because technically it's a carb, technically it's a fat, depends who you ask, and that is dark chocolate. What the heck? Okay, well, there is a line. There is some data that demonstrates that even if the dark chocolate has some sugar in it, that the sugar is somewhat offset by all the polyphenols and antioxidants in the chocolate. Now, I have some data to explain with that, but we also have to remember that dark chocolate has like 10 to 12 grams of fiber in a 100 gram serving. Okay, but let's look at a paper that was published. This was in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. It had subjects consume 100 grams of dark chocolate or 90 grams of white chocolate. Same amount of fiber, just one was dark chocolate, one was white chocolate, same amount of sugar. So what they did is they did this for 15 days, and then for 7 days, they stopped eating the chocolate. And then 15 days, again, they crossed over. The group that ate dark chocolate ate white chocolate. The group that ate white chocolate now ate dark chocolate. What they found is, without fail, whenever the dark chocolate was consumed, there were improvements in metabolic function, improvements in insulin resistance. So they had decreased insulin resistance and better insulin sensitivity. This is not just because of 11 grams of fiber. This is because of the polyphenols and the antioxidants having a powerful impact on how we metabolize glucose, and also the modulation of inflammation. When inflammation is high, insulin cannot send its signal properly. It's like static. It can't send that signal. But when inflammation is lower and the pancreas produces insulin, it can dock to an insulin receptor easier, therefore more insulin sensitivity. Okay, this next one is kind of an interesting trick, and I hope you've been sticking with this video because this is a really cool one. This is allulose. Now, allulose is a sweetener. Interestingly enough, it binds to a similar receptor that glucose would bind to. So if you take allulose and you put it on some carbohydrates, technically allulose is a carbohydrate, although some would consider it a sugar alcohol. It still falls under the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen frame of being a carbohydrate. Because it binds to the same receptor as glucose, it will actually negate the effects of glucose. So if you wanted to have some, like say berries, and you wanted to put some allulose on them, that allulose would make the berries sweeter, but it would also make it so that your glycemic response from those berries would be significantly less. Now, it's something that we need to see more data on, but essentially what we are seeing right now is very, very fascinating. So anytime you're trying to make something a little sweeter, you're trying to have a sweet treat, and you want that carbohydrate sugar fix, try using allulose. And if you're watching your continuous glucose monitor, you might actually see your glucose dip. It's that powerful. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. See you tomorrow.